We've been studying for Samuel for a couple of months now. Today we are going to look at chapter 23 and 24. So before we get into that, let's take a quick overview of what we studied last week, chapter 21 and 22. So in chapter 21 and 22, we saw how David, the king in waiting. So Israel is in a strange situation. They have two kings, one who is on the throne, Saul, and the other is David. He is also anointed as king. So Saul is someone who is out of favor with God. So though he's on the throne, God has already told him that he would lose his kingship. And God had picked David as a man after his own heart, as his king for the nation. So we have David, a king in waiting. And Saul, the king on the throne, is not very happy with the situation. So he tries to eliminate David continuously, right? So this king in waiting is also a man on the run. And as a man on the run, we see that David, especially in the last two chapters, we saw that there are several situations where he fails under pressure. He sometimes resorts to deception. He relies on weapons and allies that are unlikely, which we would think are not the weapons and allies he should ally with. But we know that David is a man after God's heart. And last time we see in the midst of his failings, during this period, and that speak of this period of his life, testifies to David's awareness of God's sovereignty over the life of all his people, right? And we see in David, he's a man who's open to correction and accountability. We saw last chapter how he takes responsibility for his actions, which caused the death of the priests of Nob and their families. So we were looking at how Saul and Israel at the crossroads, choosing between David and Saul, how David attracts a certain kind of people, how God brings David together with the prophets, priests, and others who pin their hopes on David, and how Saul, on the other hand, attracts allies like Doeg, I mispronounced it, I think, Doeg the Edomite, right? A man after Saul's own heart. And both of them do not hesitate to take lives. And to look at this week's, what we will look at today, in chapter 25, we will look at trying to contrast situations in which we can look at the priorities and leadership of qualities of both David and Saul. We'll take a look at David's heart, his reverence for God's choice, and his willingness to wait on God's timing. Okay, so do we have time to just read this portion? Verse 1 to 14 is our first section. Yeah. Okay, so all of what we're reading, this portion, in fact, this entire chapter, is set in the regions which are occupied by the tribes of Judah, right? So there are two characters and one set of people that we will focus on. The two characters, as we know, are David and Saul, and then the people of Keilah, who are David's tribesmen, right? They are his brethren. They belong to the same tribe. So these are the three people we'll focus on in this portion. All of them, we see, are under threat, right? Saul, we know, is feeling threatened by David, so he's pursuing David with an intent of eliminating him. David is a refugee. He's fleeing from Saul because his life is under threat. And at the same time, the Philistines have put the people of Keilah under threat, right? They have attacked them and they are actually exploiting them. And they are crying out. So we can expect that this portion, that the people of Keilah are actually crying out for help. Whom would they cry out to? It's natural to assume that the first person whom they would look to for help would be their king, Saul. So the questions are, does Saul respond? If he does not respond, why does he respond? And what about the people of Keilah? Whom do they turn to after that? And how do they deal with this person who is the one who comes to their rescue, right? So when we look at this portion with this mindset, the question is, what can we observe and learn about the motives of all these three groups of people, David, Saul, and the people of Keilah? And what can we understand about the way they take decisions? What drives their decisions? That's the first question for us to explore. Okay, so let's look at this portion. Interesting observations, actually. And I think a lot of what I want to share is already captured between the chat and what Santosh and Blessy brought to the table. So To explore this portion, let's ask ourselves a series of questions. The first is, why did David have to come to the aid of Keilah? And a lot of people answered this. Here are some of my thoughts. Was it likely that Saul the king had not heard of the struggle that the city was having against the Philistines? So was message not sent to him? Um, was his intelligence network not good enough for him to know that this situation was happening in his kingdom? I would think not, because David probably had not spent much time in Keilah, but Saul heard about his presence, right? And he acts promptly to trap him. So we know that Saul's intelligence network was pretty good, because he quickly hears of news that's happening in different parts of his kingdom. And we saw that even earlier, right? There are people informing Saul about David's whereabouts, right? Sometimes out of the need to win loyalty and points with Saul, sometimes out of fear. Then, so it is likely that the city, we see that in the choice they make later, Keilah seems to want the stronger people on their side. So they wanted Saul. When there's a confrontation between Saul and David, they chose between Saul. So it's likely that they sent to Saul for help, but they did not hear from him. So they turned to David, who was just 3 miles away. Right? He had about 6. They knew David was not alone. He had 600 men. They had heard stories of David's valor. After all, he was from they're from the same tribe, right? And so they turned to David, the mercenary, not the mercenary, I'm sorry, the renegade, the rebel, the runaway, because he has men, and they turned to him probably as a last resort, right? We do not know. We are told that it starts off with saying that David heard, right? The verses, when David was told about what is happening at Keilah. We do not know who brought the message to him. It could have been that Keilah, the people of Keilah sent direct messages to David asking for help, or it could be that David heard through other means. Either way, let us compare. We can assume that both Saul and David had heard about it, and let's compare their response to the news. Saul does not respond clearly. He seems to have abdicated his kingly responsibilities. Later, we see that he responds when he wants to. So there's also a question of what is his priority. David, on the other hand, is immediately moved to action. He is not officially the king or even a person in authority now, right? And Saul has clearly sent that word out that David is not a person in authority. Yet we see why God has chosen David as his king over his flock, because David has the protective heart of a shepherd towards his flock, right? So how does David respond? The first thing he does is he places himself under God's authority. We see him time and again. He always inquires of the Lord first. So he asks the Lord, should I go out and strike the Philistines? David has no doubts that he can overcome the Philistines himself if the Lord wills it. So if the Lord tells him to go out, he knows he will go out. But his followers obviously do not share his confidence. That is understandable, right? Because they're like refugees. They're not a trained army. We don't even know whether these 600 people were men who knew how to fight or who knew how to wield weapons. We do not know what weaponry they had. We know that the Israelites in general were not well armed. And we were also told that they didn't have weapons with them. So taking all of this into context, David's people had genuine concerns. Can we go up against a well-trained, armed Philistines? What does David do? He does not brush aside their obstacles, right? He listens to them. He gives them a hearing, and then he takes up these back to the Lord. He goes and asks the Lord again, should I go? Right? And the Lord answers him this time more emphatically with the justifications, because the Lord tells him in verse 4, I will give the Philistines into your hand. So tell the people, it's me who will do it. You go fight the battle, but I will give the Philistines into your hand. It is not your numbers, it's not your training, it's not the weaponry, but it's me. And so David decides to step out in faith. And was David influential? Was his faith visible? So much so that his faith would rub off on the people that followed him? The answer is yes, because we see that they followed David into battle, right? And just on this assurance that David gave them, based on the answer he got from the Lord. So the people have faith in the Lord because of David's faith. They put aside their fears and doubts and they follow David into battle and they win the encounter. So we see that even as a refugee from the king, David is still aggressively carrying out the will of the Lord. His priority is not hiding and saving his life. His priority is still to carry out the will of God, right? And his faith inspires faith in his followers, right? So we are beginning to see David, how he is shaped, how his heart is built, right? What about Saul? When does Saul act? Saul does not act as a king to protect his people. Instead, he acts when he sees an opportunity to trap and kill David, right? We do not hear anything about Saul seeking guidance from any man or God, right? But to retain appearance of spiritually sanctioned authority, we know that Israel put a lot by their king being spiritually anointed by God, right? And he wanted to retain the appearances of that. So he claims, God has delivered David into my hands in a city with gates and bars. The capital letter there is on my hands and not on God, because Saul is making his own assumptions. So we see here in Saul a person for whom a threat to himself ranks above the threat to the people of God. And that is the people God had ordained him to protect and lead. So Saul is more concerned about himself than the responsibility God has entrusted in him when he was ordained as a king, right? So what about the people of Keilah then? So we see that when Saul does not rescue them from the Philistine, they turns to the next best bet, David and his men as their Messiah. They call out to David. Probably they did, or David responds in any way, and we don't see them objecting to that. In fact, we see David is in the city of Keilah after the victory, right? Because that's what Saul hears. Then, when faced in a choice, remember Israel is at the crossroads? The people of Keilah are at a crossroad too. They now hear that Saul is coming to their city to capture David. They know what happened to the priests and their families at Nob. The last time people supported, they were eliminated. Saul's vengeance is murderous. He just doesn't visit his vengeance on the people directly involved. He will even eliminate everybody around, the entire families. So they fear Saul. So when faced with the possible wrath and vengeance of Saul for allowing David into the city, they would rather betray their Messiah, David, than risk inviting the wrath and vengeance of Saul, right? So how does Saul, so the question does not end there, right? How does David react to the news of Saul's plan to trap him? How does he view what the people of Keilah are doing? We see that when David hears about Saul coming, his first concern is for the people of Keilah, his flock, right? He was concerned when they were under threat by the Philistines. He's still concerned by them, even because he knows that how Saul responds with vengeance, right? So he knows that his presence in the city might cause another massacre, like what happened at Nob with the families of the priests. So David again humbly seeks God's guidance. And this time David has two queries. He says, if I stay and oppose Saul, will I be betrayed by the leaders of Keilah? Second, will Saul really come and attack Keilah? These are two questions that he has of the Lord. Interestingly, God does not answer his first question, which is when David asks him, if I stay and oppose Saul, will I be betrayed by the leaders of Keilah? God chooses to answer his second question first. He answers him that yes, Saul is going to come, right? David has to rephrase his question. Will the leaders of Keilah deliver me and my men into Saul's hand? So it looks like God is giving David a reminder that your concern should not only be about yourself, it should be about the people of Keilah too. And when David rephrases the first question again, God answers him and he tells him, yes, they are going to deliver you, right? So what does David do? He does not strike out at the people of Keilah because of their possible treachery, right? Instead, he chooses to leave the city. Again, his concern is for the people, his flock. So he chooses to leave the city and head out to the wilderness of Ziph, right? So that's what we can learn from that portion: David's heart and Saul's heart, and how they take decisions. Okay. The next portion is
one thing, Sushil, I just want to also comment. we also see God's hand in the whole story. I was thinking how, as we see in the whole of the Bible, how God is moving across with His plan. So, in the case of David and Saul, as you said, God was actively protecting David, as also he was seeking God's will. But also beyond that, do we also see that he um, God, David would become the savior of Israel and also the ancestor of Christ. So God was actually working out a plan uh, in the bigger picture. Do we see that actively happening here? Was also I was thinking.
I believe so. Actually, that's why I chose the word Messiah here, though it's not there in the word. I see a picture here, right? Even David, the way he responds to Kayla is a lot like how the Lord responds when he says, "Forgive them, Lord, for they know not what they're doing," right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
God's concern for everybody, right? And David demonstrating the same concern, and how David is being shaped also. It is very interesting, right? How God is slowly correcting him, shaping him, and how he's shaping Israel also, preparing Israel for David, just like he's preparing creation for the Lord. So I think I totally agree with what you're saying. And I clearly see God's hand is moving forward history, right? Towards his
Yeah.
plan,
Yeah.
right? So I put in the word Messiah there, but I was wondering whether it's just me seeing the foreshadowing, but I didn't want to call that out explicitly there. But there is a lot of parallel when we look at this and Jesus actually. So yeah, the next portion is verse 15 to 29. Okay. It's a large portion. Since we are running short of time, probably we'll not read it. I'm hoping people have read this portion already. So in this portion, what stands out is David is again out in the wilderness, right? He's out of the city. He's hiding in the caves and the mountains and in the wilderness. And while he's running and hiding, it is David should have felt depressed by the betrayal that he is getting. Saul is continuously hunting him down. People are informing Saul about his whereabouts. And now his own tribe, the Ziphites, are betraying him, right? Ziphites also, I believe, Judahites, right? People of the tribe of Judah. So during all this time, the thing is, what encouragement does? Is God silent? When David is in trouble, when he's running, when he's facing betrayal, is God silent? Psalms 54 is a psalm that is written. It is told that it was written during this time, not about this time. It was written during this time. And we can imagine David in the camp actually singing this psalm to his people, right? And leading them in worship and singing this psalm. Verse 4 of the psalm is very significant. It captures the essence of today's lesson, right? He tells them, look, God is my deliverer. The Lord is among those who support me, right? So the question in this portion, where we see David running around, betrayed by the Ziphites, we see how Jonathan comes to him, seeks him out to encourage him. So the question is, what are the ways we can see God acting while David is running and hiding? When David is in trouble, when he's facing betrayal, was God silent? How did God speak to David? How did God intervene in the story? Okay, that's the second question for us to explore. Okay, so let's just get in. Okay, let's look at this portion. The question is, was God silent? The short answer, as you all expect, is no, right? But then how do we know? So let's look at the longer answer. How do we know God is not silent? Is it only the direct evidence of this portion? Actually, if you look from 1 Samuel 16 onwards, we see that God has directly been intervening in history, in David's life. We see God picking David, the unlikely candidate from among Jesse's sons, right? He picks the most unlikely of Jesse's sons as his king because it is David who has a heart for God. We saw how God had put David through training. His family had relegated to him the role of a shepherd, which was not a very high task. But through that, how David trained him to be a shepherd leader for his people, for his flock, right? We see how God filled David with his Holy Spirit. We were told earlier that the Holy Spirit filled him from that day onwards, right? We see God positioning David in King Saul's palace in the most unlikely circumstance. He first enters as a musician to bring comfort to Saul, who's troubled. by his spirits, right? By the evil spirits. Then God put David on center stage in Israel's attention. So he brought him to Saul's attention, and then God brings David to Israel's attention and pre-equipped him to take on Goliath, whom everybody feared, right? And we see how God united the hearts of David and Jonathan with spiritual cords. So the man who should have been king, Jonathan, after Saul, is united to the man who's going to be king instead of him, right? And these are strong spiritual cords that withstand all sorts of pressures. We studied some of that earlier. We'll look at it today also. We see how God gave David success as commander of Saul's army, thereby placing him in the hearts of Israel as their hope for deliverance. We see how God protected David's life against all attempts, direct and indirect. We see how David was supported during his troubles through friends like Jonathan, by the prophets Samuel and Gad, by the priests Abimelech, by kings Abimelech, Achish, the king of Gath, the king of Moab, and through the people who choose to follow him, right? In all of this, if David looked back on his life, he could see God's hand. God was not silent in his life, right? He was directing his life. And in the present, so if David looked at chapter 23, the portion that we're looking at, David would have again seen evidence of God's hand, that God was not silent. 4 times we see David turning to the Lord for guidance, and every time the Lord answers him unambiguously, right? We see how God was David's radar, warning him of dangers and successes beyond the horizon of his human vision. God assures him of victory against the Philistines, a most unlikely victory with the kind of people he had versus the people he was going against. God warns David that he would be betrayed by Keilah. He would be handed over by the people of Keilah to Saul. All of these things are warnings and signs that God gives him ahead of time, right? So we see God is not silent. He is David's advance warning radar, right? And when David is a refugee, hiding in the mountains and the wilderness, God sends him encouragement and assurance through David, through Jonathan, his spiritual brother, right? Jonathan brings David an assurance that the Lord will deliver him. And he also gives him inside information, which is very interesting. He tells him, my father secretly knows that you are going to be king and this will come to pass. So it's an assurance both that the Lord will make this to come to pass, and my father also knows it, right? So, and then God always provided for David with faithful informers. So every time we see that David is warned either by God directly or by informers and supporters, right? And these people had to go to great personal risk against Saul to go and inform David. We know how Saul would react if he discovered it, right? So in all of these, we see that David is getting a word from the Lord, is providing for him in all these aspects, right? Through prayer directly as well as through people, right? And then when David and his men are betrayed by Ziphites, they're cornered in the wilderness, and only a huge rock, we are told, stands between them and Saul, right? And it is at this rock that the Lord directly intervenes. Saul is a span away from capturing David, right? With his huge army against David's small band of men. And Saul's attention is diverted by the news of the Philistine raid. We know that Saul is not easily diverted when the Philistines are attacking his kingdom. So if he had to go away, it must be that the Philistines had to enter into places which are very near and important to Saul, because he now chooses to abandon his hunt for David and go and fight the Philistines. So we can see God's hand here, right? Directly, there's a divine intervention that God is doing here, right? So was David confident? What about David himself? Was David confident throughout that the Lord is not silent or absent? The evidence is in the Psalms that he composes during this period. Some of the most beautiful Psalms are the Psalms David wrote about his troubles during this period, right? And during this period. Psalm 34 David talks about being delivered from danger in the court of the king Achish in Gath, very feigned madness, right? Psalm 52 is written about the situation David is betrayed by Doeg the Edomite, right? Psalm 54 is written about today's chapter. It is written, and we are told it was, if you read Psalm 54, David seems to have narrated this psalm, sang this psalm at this point in time when the Ziphites betrayed David and informed Saul where he is hiding. Psalm 56 was written when when the Philistines seized David, right? Psalm 57 and 42 is about when David was hiding in the caves of Adullam. So throughout we know that God is not silent. God is acting, is evident, and David is very aware and confident about that. And why? In Psalm 54:4, verse 4, which is written in this time, in this particular time that you're looking at, David summarizes his confidence in the Lord. He says, "Behold, God is my deliverer." Right? He is surrounded by Saul, but God is my deliverer, and the Lord is with those who uphold my life. Right? So clearly, David is very confident that the Lord always is watching over him, and that his life is in God's hand, and God is sovereign over history and over his life. The last portion for our study is chapter 24, verses 1 to 22. Okay, it's a longer portion, and I think I'm hoping everyone would have read it. The key here is David has Saul's life in his hand, right? And yet he spares him. Saul is literally delivered right into the hands of David in the cave that he's hiding, right? However, Saul refuses to take the shortcut. He's tempted by his advisors, by his people. This is an opportunity to end our running and hiding. It's a shortcut to the throne, but David refuses to take that option. So the question is, how was David reasoning out, right? It's a quandary for David because God has chosen Saul as king before he chose David as king, and David is aware of this. Surely the same God, must be reasoning, the same God who chose it wise, who chose and saw it okay to have two kings at the same time, the same God would put him on the throne by his own hand, and he would be willing to wait on the Lord's judgment and timing. So that's the essence of what we will see in this portion. So we see in this portion, both David and Saul have advisors. In the context that they are in, they are receiving advice from people, right? But there's a big difference between David and Saul in the way they evaluate the advice and how they act on the advice they receive. So our question is, what can we learn from David about how to evaluate advice and take decisions? That's a last question for us to ponder on from chapter 24. So let's just dig into this portion, okay? First, some context. The hem of a person's garment in those days had symbolic significance. The hem normally had adornments that symbolized the person's standing, right? Like tassels on the hem of your garment to say whether you're a Pharisee, Sadducee. The priest's garment, the hem of the priest's garment had adornments. So also the hem of the king's garment had adornments that symbolized his position as a king. Cutting off the hem of Saul's garment was a message heavy with symbolic significance. If you throw your mind back to 1 Samuel 15:28, we see how Samuel had actually told Saul that God had actually lost, that Saul had lost was not in the Lord's favor any longer because of his disobedience. And Samuel left Saul. He did not want to accompany him. So there's a parting of ways between Saul and Samuel in chapter 15. And there we see how Saul tries to grab onto Samuel. And he ends up grabbing Samuel's robe and tearing off the hem of his robe. And at that point, Samuel prophesies to Saul that the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you this day and has given it to one of your colleagues who's better than you. So here we are seeing a partial fulfillment of that prophecy, right? Symbolically. Just like Saul grabbed Samuel's robe and tore off the hem of his garment, his robe, David is tearing off a hem of Saul's garment, right? There's some context just to position this portion that we are studying. How does David's men see the situation? So they are hiding in this cave. We are told it's a place where an entire sheepfold, that is a large fold of sheep, could actually, so it was a large cave which could hold a large fold of sheep. David with the 600 men are hiding deep in this cave when Saul and his 3,000 men come there, right? And Saul wants to relieve himself. And so he decides to enter into the cave by himself. So to David's men, it must have looked like divine provision. They didn't have to set a trap for Saul, like how Blessy said. David just walked into their Saul just walked into their hands, right? So they must have seen it as divine provision. They would have told that, in fact, they're telling David, right? This is divine provision. See, Saul has delivered himself into your hand. And they're telling him, surely this is an opportunity for David to cut right through to the throne and end their days of running and hiding. A very attractive proposition, right? And wasn't this exactly what David was praying for in his Psalms? They must have told David, see, all those Psalms that you sang, isn't this exactly what you were praying for? Because in this portion, we see that the men of David are telling him, here is the day of which the Lord said to you, behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you, right? So they're actually trying to convince David. They're convinced themselves, right? But how does David see the situation? How does David process the advice that he receives? David's convictions, we know, are very strong. His convictions of the sovereignty of the Lord and his deep respect for God's anointing spoke louder to his heart than the attractive advice he was receiving from his men. So we see David actually initially going and cutting off the hem of Saul's garment, but we are told immediately he regretted it. He knows that what he has done is a sign of disrespect of the authority that the Lord had vested in Saul, right? Verse 5 and 6 says, after David's conscience bothered him, afterwards, that's after he cut off the hem of Saul's garment, his conscience bothered him because he had cut off an edge of Saul's robe. He said to his men, may the Lord keep me far from doing such a thing to my Lord, that is Saul, who is the Lord's chosen one, by extending my hand against him. After all, he is the Lord's chosen one. So we see David's deep respect for God's sovereignty. And he is convinced that the Lord cannot do something that is wrong. If the Lord anointed Saul and the Lord anointed me, the Lord is going to resolve this dilemma. It is not my hand that has to do it, right? And later also we see David willingly sharing this conviction with Saul. In verse 12, he tells Saul, may the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord vindicate me against you, but my hand shall not be raised against you. So he's telling Saul that both of us are in this situation. The Lord has placed us in this situation, but it's not my hand that will resolve the situation. It's the Lord's hand, right? So David, in effect, would not seize the kingdom from Saul. It was God who anointed him as king, even while Saul was still king. And David was willing to patiently wait for the Lord to direct his path to the throne. And then David would not take the life of Saul. It shows his deep respect for God's anointing, right? He would rely on God's judgment over Saul, but he would not touch the head of a man that was a head that was anointed by the Lord, right? So, and David did not stop there, right? He processed this advice. He took his decisions based on his convictions. His convictions are so deep that he was able to process the advice wisely. And then David modeled all of this for his people. Not only to his people, he modeled his faith and his conviction to Saul also, right? We are told that David persuaded his men with his words. When they put pressure on him to kill Saul and end the troubles, David was persuasive, right? He held them down and he convinced them that they should not do this, right? And when he addresses Saul, after he comes out of the cave, right, he calls out to Saul and he tells him how close Saul was, how he had been delivered into his hands, but he had chosen not to take his life. Saul there is addressed by David as his Lord, his king, and his father. So David was expressing respect, submission, and affection for Saul, even in the face of the conflict between them, right? So, and then that's something David is modeling for his people. David's heart is moved by the way Saul, the Lord's anointed, is being misled. So David clearly is able to see better than Saul is. He knows that Saul is being misled, right? And David will not take Saul's life, but he still does not go away, right? He does not hesitate to point out to Saul his flaws in his thinking. We saw the other man who had a heart for God, just like David, Jonathan, also doing the same thing earlier, right? He confronts Saul, his father, and he points out the flaws. Likewise, David also doing the same thing here, right? He doesn't walk away silently, but courageously points out his flaws. He draws attention, Saul's attention, that you are seeking and paying attention to the words of men instead of the words Lord's direction, right? In verse 9 and 13, David tells him, why do you pay attention when men say David is seeking to do you harm? Today, your own eyes have seen how the Lord delivered you. And in verse 13, it's what you are doing is like the old proverb, Saul, from evil people, evil proceeds. So you're relying on evil people and you're relying on their advice, and that's why your actions are evil. Then we see David appealing to Saul. Why are you, the king, trying to eliminate me? I am your loyal subject and son-in-law. So he tells him, who has the king of Israel come after? I'm recognizing that you are my king, right? Why is it that you are pursuing me? I'm just your loyal subject, right? This is like pursuing a dead dog, a single flea. Both of these are not worthy of the king's attention. And then he also tells Saul, please recognize that the Lord is directing both our lives and our paths. Because in verse 15, David tells Saul, may the Lord therefore be the judge between us. Let him give the sentence between me and you, and see to it and plead my cause and deliver me from my hand. So David knows it's inevitable what's going to happen, but he's willing to let the Lord direct his paths, right? But what about Saul? Saul clearly misses the essence of David's advice, that the Lord should direct your thoughts and actions, not the events in your life. Because we know Saul, right? He's very short. He doesn't keep his oaths for long, right? Verse 18 and 19, Saul declares, and Saul declares, right? And you have declared this day how you dealt with me. He's telling David, I know how you have dealt with me. And in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For normally a man, if he finds his enemy, will not let him go away safe. So the Lord will reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. So he seems to understand something, but he's missed the essence of David's advice, right? And why is it that he is missing the essence? Because Saul's heart is not right with the Lord. He cannot hold his convictions and his promises or the promises he makes for long. The conflicting emotions, the war in his heart between obedience to God and between pride, self-preservation, rebellion, always seems to push the spiritual convictions out of Saul's heart, right? So in this portion, we see how under pressure, it is sometimes very difficult to tune into God and listen to his word and to wait on the Lord, but it is not impossible. The big secret we take from David is the strength of his convictions, right? The one big lesson is David is telling us is how to wait on the Lord. It is difficult, but look back on the evidence of God in your life. Look back on the evidence of the Lord in your life today, how the Lord has provided for you in the past, and rest on that. Put your faith on that. That's the foundation on which you build your faith. So that's what David teaches us today. So the breakout question for us is, do you find it difficult to wait on the Lord's timing? David is willing to wait on the Lord. And what can we learn from David about why he was willing to wait on the Lord? Okay, so that's our breakout question. So it's been a long session today. Let's conclude. Just you can see my screen. Just wanted to leave this verse, a favorite verse of mine with you actually, Isaiah 40:31. Those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. So, I mean, it's beautiful, right? It's not that you will crawl to the end line and get over the end line. You will actually run across and you will fly across the ending line. And that's God's promise. So next week, we will study 1 Samuel chapter 25. A very interesting story, David's encounter with the wise Abigail and the foolish Nabal. Okay, May 16th.